So we found that Latinos have generally become more pessimistic about their place in the country, about the state of Latinos in the US, and are downbeat about the Trump administration's policies and approach to immigration and economics, particularly. In this survey, we found, for example, 65% of Latino adults tell us that the situation of US Latinos is worse today than it was a year ago. We've never seen a figure this high going all the way back to 2008 in surveys we have done at the Pew Research Center.
We haven't seen a negative view of Latinos in this country since 2008, or is it ever in your research?
Ever in our research. We've never seen it as high as 2/3. We've hit maybe 50% like during the Great Recession. But that was the highest we'd seen before. They hit 65% is really, really the highest we've ever seen, and it stands out.
Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of the Latino Vote podcast, where I am visited today by one of the people that I have admired for a very, very, very long time. He knows this, so it's not like I'm trying to score extra points here. But even in my earliest days of doing research and trying to understand the Latino voter, there was one Latino name that consistently came up that was doing incredible work through a couple of different variations of where he currently is right now, which is the Pew Research Center. We were talking earlier when it was at a different, the Pew Charitable Trust Foundation, and then it was like the Pew Hispanic Research Center. He is now the director of Race and Ethnicity of research at Pew, which, as you all know, I have been saying for years is the gold standard for Latino public opinion. And so we've had Mark on the show before. Some new Latino polling data came out. I wanted to share it with everybody because I don't want you to get, just an understanding from me or Chuck's assessment. You should. But by all means, let's talk to somebody who does this for a living, understands the science behind it, and perhaps most importantly, has an extremely long track record of watching the whole Latino story and political maturity and changes developing unfold, because it allows us to get some better questions asked. And it gives us the perspective of time and the understanding of why methodologies were what they were, why they've changed, why we're doing it now, and all that super nerdy stuff that all of you guys that are listening really, really love to get into. So without further ado, welcome Dr. Mark Hugo Lopez, Director of Race and Ethnicity at Pew Research. It's such a great pleasure to have you back, brother.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. There's a lot in this report and the survey, so happy to get started whenever you like.
Yeah. So let's jump into this, and I want you to start with kind of the big 30,000-foot methodologies. How many Latinos are we talking about? These poll results, are they all Latinos? Are they registered voters? Todos, everything. Just kind of set the table, and then we'll walk through some of the findings, and I'm going to poke some questions at you.
So this is based largely on a survey of Latinos, 5,000 Latino adults, that was conducted in October of this year. So this is a relatively recent survey. And again, it's all Latino adults, not just registered voters. But it does have one element that is really interesting, which is we were able to link the responses of our respondents to how they voted in the 2024 election. So we had a validated voter study that we had done in 2024. We linked those so we could say something about how do Latino Trump voters feel about the questions that we asked? How did his Harris voters respond? And interestingly, how did Latinos who didn't vote, because many of them didn't, who were eligible to do so, what about their opinions on these same questions? So that's an important analysis frame for this piece, which I think is a really nice additional analytic point to be able to have. On top of that, we try to look at change over the last year. So this is another important part. Our survey was done in October, but we have many other data points from February, March, June that allow us to say how opinions among Latinos overall have changed during this second Trump administration.
And so just so people are aware, when you say that you can match it to how they voted, this means you've talked to these voters before and have asked them how they voted, and they've offered that. You're not cracking into some sort of new methodology formula or voting machine to find out that information, right?
No, that's right. Although we are going to official voter records to verify that the person actually voted. So we do ask our respondents, and these are people who are in our panel, what is called the America Trends panel, in addition to another panel from SSRS called their opinion panel. But both of them have the same respondents largely. And so we can take a look and see whether or not somebody said they voted in 2024, confirm from voting records that they did. We have asked how they voted, and therefore we can say something about who is a Trump voter and who is a Harris voter and whether or not they actually did vote.
Perfect. So I just wanted that predicate set just so that people understand what we're doing here. The other thing, and this is very important so people understand, there's a very big difference between when you ask somebody if they voted and whether they actually did or did not vote. People either sometimes don't remember, or sometimes people will say, I probably should have voted, so I'm going to say I voted, a little bit of shame. That doesn't mean that you're, treat the respondent any differently, but what you do is you verify that what they're saying and they're telling you actually matches up with the government's data saying this person did in fact show up and vote. And then that gives you a cleaner set of data when you're looking. Fair enough?
That's absolutely right. And thank you for clarifying that, because that's such an important part of this, is that this is verifying if people actually did vote, even if they may have told us that they did when they actually didn't, or the other way around. This is meant to verify that.
All right. So, Dr. Lopez, let's get into this. Big picture stuff. What did you find? What did you find broadly? Let's start with the 30,000 foot tectonic stuff, and then I'm going to, like you can already tell, I'm already excited. I got to get into this stuff and poke your brain a little bit.
So we found that Latinos have generally become more pessimistic about their place in the country, about the state of Latinos in the U.S., and are downbeat about the Trump administration's policies and approach to immigration and economics, particularly. In this survey, we found, for example, 65% of Latino adults tell us that the situation of U.S. Latinos is worse today than it was a year ago. We've never seen a figure this high going all the way back to 2008 in surveys we have done at the Pew Research Center. In addition, 70% of Latino adults tell us that they disapprove of the job the president is doing. And 65% tell us that they disapprove of the way he's handling immigration policy. And 61% say that the economy is worse under Trump. So we're seeing a very downbeat assessment of the current administration and also about the ways in which Latinos themselves feel. Now, there's a lot more detail that we could jump into, but that's the big picture, a sense of pessimism. But Mike, I want to add something else, which I think is interesting. So the economy, of course, was one of the top issues for Latino voters in 2024. And it continues to be an important issue that many people say prices, cost of living is an issue that they see. But also we found that Latinos are upbeat. About half expect their finances to get better in the next year. So there's a little bit of a mix of findings in here that, on the one hand, they're downbeat about the way in which things are happening in the economy and Trump is handling the economy. But on the other hand, they expect things to improve in the next year. That theme runs through a lot of the other findings in the report.
And I want to visit with this on a little bit more, Mark, if we can, because I think it's so profoundly put, especially from a research center like Pew. And this may sound like just kind of a passing data point, but from my perspective, it's probably one of the most significant findings in actually many years, which is this rising pessimism amongst Latinos is very uncharacteristic of the Latino community and the Latino voter broadly. A lot of researchers I want your opinion on all of this, would suggest, I think rightfully, that as we are a considerably younger demographic, oftentimes optimism is a function of youth. Your life is ahead of you. You're anticipating all of these things you're going to do. You're more resilient. You don't have the burden of maybe a mortgage and kids and bills and all that stuff. So the future looks bright. And a lot of it is because we're also more recently migrated. A lot of researchers have noticed that immigrants tend to be more optimistic about the American dream and the American idea and the possibilities before them. But what we're seeing, as you said, just so impactfully, we haven't seen a negative view of Latinos in this country since 2008, or is it ever in your research?
Ever in our research. We've never seen it as high as 2/3. We've hit maybe 50%, like during the Great Recession, but that was the highest we'd seen before. To hit 65% is really, really the highest we've ever seen, and it stands out.
It's not even a little bit higher. It's much higher, and it's heartbreaking. And what I really want you to do is listen to what Dr. Lopez is saying, because what he's saying is there's also data from this research showing that Latinos personally have even seen some financial improvement, like, for example, in their incomes, or maybe got a raise in the last year. But something else is at play here. And this is going to, I'm really looking forward to kind of figuring out the economy and immigration crackdown question, because all these listeners know my opinion of it. I certainly respect yours. We might be seeing a change here because of the overreach that has happened. There's no question there's an interplay between the two. But am I capturing this right, Dr. Lopez, what I'm saying? It's not just a function of the economy on why people are feeling pessimistic. They are feeling separate and distinct as Latinos, and they don't feel that the future of being Latino or their own Latinidad in America is headed in the right direction.
That's absolutely right. More Latinos are, for example, telling us that they don't feel comfortable in their place or secure in their place in the country. Many Latinos are also telling us that they see that the Trump administration's policies are hurting Latinos. One finding that is in the report that we have in the back chapter, but that we didn't highlight higher up, is one that actually I find really interesting, which is that 1/3 of Latino adults told us they've thought about leaving the United States sometime in the next 6 months, or sometime over the last 6 months, I should say.
One third.
1/3
of leaving the country, not the states, not their states, the country.
The country. What's interesting to me about this is that it's U.S.-born Latinos who are more likely to say this, about 35% versus 27% for immigrant Latinos. When you ask them why, the number one reason is the political situation in the country. That is the number one reason. And do people want to return to their countries of origin, their families, and so forth? About half say they want to go to a country other than that home country. So it is interesting that we have, in some ways, people indicating things are more downbeat. They feel downbeat about the situation of Latinos in the country. And another way to look at that is some people are talking about, quote unquote, leaving the country or voting with their feet as a way to perhaps find other opportunities elsewhere in the world. That to me is a really striking finding in this report, because it all comes together in telling that story that you've just told, which for some Latinos, pessimism has become a big part of the way in which they see life in the United States. I do think it's notable how we are in a situation now where we have oftentimes seen Latinos being among the most optimistic about life in the United States, and now they are pessimistic. Now, we didn't ask, of course, the rest of the U.S. public, how do you think the situation on Latinos is today? We didn't ask the rest of the public that. It's not quite relevant. But it is interesting that Latinos have become so downbeat, and it's across many different things. It's not just about economics or immigration enforcement.
What did you guys test? I didn't see this, but again, you were the one who developed the instrument. Did you guys test the priority between economics and the immigration question, and what is driving this change in voting behavior? Because I want to visit with you on what's causing these wild swings back and forth and get your professional opinion on it. But did you test that prioritization?
We did not. This was not a issues priority list where you might have in a traditional political poll. That was not what we had. What we had was a battery of questions about economic situation, what you're experiencing, but also your views of the Trump administration's policies. And then the same thing for immigration, where in immigration, we ask about worry about deportation, worry about maybe being detained, worry about being asked to show your papers, all of which are factors that we've seen have all gone up since February in terms of the share of Latinos who say those things are on their minds and they're worried about it.
Talk to us about how much it's gone up, because I think we all know people in our family, our neighborhoods, our crew that are like carrying passports with them every day, right? Yeah. There's a palpable terror in elements of the Latino community right now. And I didn't mean to say this jokingly, but a reporter asked, and when you see Congresswoman Salazar in Florida introducing immigration reform package, I'm like, when the Cubans are worried about it, like it's time to worry, because it's like the whole diaspora. It doesn't matter whether you're Cubano, Mexicano, Venezolano, Dominicano, whatever. Like when everybody's scared, like you're creating a multi-ethnic, multi-generational, multi-country of origin block that did not exist. And we're seeing pretty overwhelming numbers that suggest it's all coming together.
That is right. And let's talk about some numbers. So when you take a look at, for example, worry about deportation, today, more than half of Latino adults tell us they worry that somebody that they know or they themselves could be deported. That's up from about 37% in February earlier this year. So worry about deportation has gone up. In addition, the share of Latinos who say that they're worried about being asked for their papers is now at 43%. It is up from half that about in March of this year. So again, concern about having to show your papers is also up. And so when we take a
Were
look
those real quick, Mark, I don't mean to interrupt, but did you test that before Trump's second term?
we have asked these questions before, and on worry about deportation, for example, in the past, we have seen it sometimes this high. It was this high maybe in the 2010s. It was a different survey that was done by telephone. This is an online panel survey. So keep in mind there's a methodological difference. We've seen it this high kind of before, but I put a caveat on that we haven't, the two methods are different and it's not possible to compare them. Nonetheless, we have seen it go up and down before, and it's gone up. It went up in the Obama years. It went up a little bit in the early part of the Trump administration, and also actually it fluctuated during Biden. So initially, my take was in February and March that, it looks like worry is up a little bit, but it's not very different from what we'd seen in the Biden or the first Trump administration. But now it is outpacing those other periods. And so we are seeing an increase in concern. With regards to other measures, we also asked Latinos whether or not they think Trump's policies are going too far, not far enough, or just right when it comes to enforcing immigration. And today, more than half of Latinos say there's too much enforcement now. That wasn't the case back in February. Interestingly, both Republican and Democrats on all of these measures are up, even if Latinos who are Republican aren't up quite as much. And particularly Latino Trump voters in 2024, while they too are worried about deportation and their numbers are up slightly, it's not up as much as other groups of Latinos, yet they are up when it comes to the enforcement, the level of enforcement on Trump's immigration policies, saying that it's too much. So a greater share say that it's too much. All that is to tell you that it's a really interesting story. I'm sorry.
No. I'm sorry for interrupting. It's like this. I've got like 8 questions based off of just what you just said there. But is it fair to say with Trump supporting Latino voters, there's a bigger break between those who, or at least mentally separate immigration enforcement from the government overreach and are seeing those as two separate things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would put it this way. They see they have a growing level of concern about the level of immigration enforcement. So a greater share of Latino Trump voters are saying, Trump's doing too much. But the share that say they worry about somebody being deported remains well below other groups. Even though it's up slightly, it's up to about 33% in October. And for all Latinos, as you know, it's over 52%. What's interesting here again is that you see a slight increase, but the worry about the personal impact is not quite as big as the assessment of how Trump's policies are going. And that's, again, a theme that we see throughout this report is this mix of maybe not personally affecting them necessarily, but there is this sense of disapproval of Trump's economic or immigration policies. And in this case on immigration, you see this with Trump voters as well, Latino Trump voters.
Let's talk about Trump specifically now.
Yeah.
Because obviously these changes, to whatever degree we can, in our political environment, people will have opinions all over the place on this, but there's no question that he's part of the factor of all of this dramatic movement, one way or the other. And is it fair to say that these dramatic shifts that we saw in 2024 towards the Republicans and equally dramatic or considerably maybe as dramatic back in 2025, are they related to him specifically, or is it part of a broader realignment or shift that we're hearing from so many people talking about?
That's a tough question to answer, but it's a really good one. I think it's one that a lot of us obviously in this space want to know. From our work, so first let's talk about what happened with Trump's success with Latino voters, just to put some numbers on the table. In 2016, he won 28% of Latino voter support. In 2020, 36%. In 2024, 48%, so about half. That's just all from our validated voter study. Same method across all these years. It looks like he made gains among Latinos with people who hadn't voted before. So there was many Latinos who were voting for the first time who voted for Trump, and that was particularly true in 2024. So is it about him winning more Latino voters? Certainly seems so. Is it maybe Trump's persona or Trump the candidate? I think that's a big part of it. I think he appealed to many Latino voters, particularly people who hadn't really been engaged before. And what I don't know is in 2025, how much of it is that he wasn't on the ballot and who actually turned out to vote in the specific state. So it's kind of a little bit, in my view, hard to disentangle all of that. But I would say that Latino Trump voters, whether or not they voted they were going to vote in 2025 or not, and in the 2026 election coming up, among Latino Trump voters, Trump's approval rating has declined. It's gone from about 92% to 81%. So he's had a decline in approval, even among those Latinos who voted for him. Now, that's not unusual. We see that in our surveys of the general public as well. So in many ways, Latino Trump voters are tracking other Trump voters on almost the same pattern of change, even if the level isn't quite as high. We also see that throughout the survey, Latino Trump voters are among the strongest supporters of the president and all of the policy questions that we asked about. Even if they express some concern about immigration enforcement, they are still among his strongest supporters, along with Latinos who are evangelical Protestants, for example. That's another strong group of supporters among Latinos overall.
So is that drop off of Latino support for Latinos who voted for Trump dropped from, help me again, 92% to about 81% approval?
That's correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
Is that bigger or smaller than non-Hispanic Trump supporters?
It's the same decline, but the Trump voters who are not Hispanic started like 95 or 96%, and are at like 85%. So
same percentage, but they started at higher and are ending at higher.
Ending at higher, but the same decline in terms of a percentage point decline. So it looks very, very similar, statistically indistinguishable. But the pattern is similar. It's just that the levels are not quite there. But again, we're talking 81% versus 85%. Yes, Trump non-Hispanic voters are higher, but is that really a huge difference? Probably not. It's very, very similar.
Does that tell us anything, Mark, that we should be paying attention to, or no?
Oh, I think one of the things that I think is interesting is that it shows you that Latinos who voted for Trump in some ways look more like other non-Latino Trump voters than the story of Latino Republicans overall compared to other Republicans. Our surveys over the years have regularly shown that, Latino Republicans certainly look like other Republicans in some way, but never quite to the same degree. So they might support gun rights, for example, but the level of support is not as high as it is among other Republicans, yet it is higher than Latino Democrats. So they're kind of in this middle space. But it's interesting that for Latino Trump voters, those gaps are smaller on the questions we asked about than we have seen for Latino Republicans overall. And I think it's also interesting to note that not every Latino who voted for Trump is a Republican, and not every Latino Republican who voted for Trump. There is it's not a one-to-one. There is some overlap, but there's also many folks who aren't in either camp.
That's fascinating. Is there a generational component to the MAGA Latino, or is there an evangelical component, or is that reading too much into all of this?
No. We published in the back of this report, and I don't remember all the numbers off the top of my head, but we did publish in the back of the report the demographics of Latino Trump voters from our validated voter study. And it is an interesting profile. They tend to be less college educated, for example. They tend to be more U.S. born, though not, of course, not entirely. You have all elements of the Latino population represented among them. But it is interesting that, there is some differences. And in the report, you could see how Latino Republicans overall, so people who say they are Republican or lean Republican, compared to Latinos who voted for Trump in 2024. And there are some differences. And then Latino Democrats are they tend to be a little bit more college educated and so forth. So there are some distinct differences that emerge in the data.
They're reflecting the overall trends that are happening in non-Hispanics is kind of what's going on. On both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, Mike, this is one of those places where I'm sure you've heard me say this before. Our data over many, many years sometimes makes me wonder if there is how much of a distinct story there is for Latino voters. To be flip, it's like, is there even such a thing as Latino voters or the Latino vote? There is. But I sometimes wonder how big these differences are, because we've seen the issue list look very similar. And as the population gets bigger and bigger, now 1 in 5 Americans are Latinos.
I know.
In many ways, they reflect America, right? Because they're such a big part of the broader story. So, but it's an interesting question.
I want to point this out to listeners, and I want you to, this is, of course, my opinion. But what Mark just said comes from a researcher who's very confident in what he does from a scientific place. A lot of political consultants on both sides wouldn't be willing or able to say that because they've got a bias or reason to find an issue or a set or perspective that keeps them relevant in what it is that they're doing. What Mark is basically saying is, I can't quantifiably say that that's true. And this is very much a country in transition where now 1 in 5 Americans are Hispanic.
Yeah.
And when we both started, we were younger and I had hair, like Mark still does, it was a very significantly different country. And we had these different conceptions of what might be happening. But as the data gets richer and richer and bigger, and you can start seeing longer trend lines, there's some real questions. And he is saying it is different. We're still learning exactly how it's different. We're seeing these changes, like this change from optimism to pessimism that is happening. We're seeing sort of, increases in income, but still a negative on ethnic identity that we've kind of always watched and said, is this still an ethnic voter? How much? Which generation? Where's it all going? But I just want to say thank you to somebody who is still focused on truth and is willing to say, I'm not too sure it is that different because it might be becoming more ethnically focused. We're seeing some echoes of that in this data, but there's a lot of data saying it's not at all. And this is something a bit unique in American history. Is that fair to say?
I don't know if it's unique in American history, but I think it may be part of the broader story of what happens to many groups of people who come to this country. And after generations and generations, things begin to change. I also think it may be also unique to the post-1965 immigration wave in the world that we're in. The country, like you were saying earlier, is different now than it was, say, 20 years ago or 25 years ago. And even then, it was different from what it was in 1965. And that's largely due to the arrival of so many immigrants from places like Latin America and Asia. I'm not sure, Mike, if I ever shared this number with you, but did you know that 72 million immigrants have arrived in the United States since 1965? And half of those are from Latin America. 1/4 of that 72 million are from Mexico alone. Now, not everybody stays. Many people leave. Some people die. But 72 million people have made a decision to come to the United States in this last 50 years or so. And it really, 60 years, and it really is striking when you think about it, how big that number is. It's about
20%. It's about 20% of our current population.
Yes, right. Yes. And of course, not everybody stayed, right? But
right.
And the population of immigrants today is probably around 50 million. It's declining, which, by the way, it's the first time we've had a decline in this population in 50 years. But about 15% of the U.S. population, so 1 in 7 Americans, are immigrants. And if you add their kids, their U.S.-born children, that adds another 15%. So about 30% of the U.S. population are either immigrants or the U.S.-born children of immigrant parents. Again, we're reaching record highs in these shares. The nation has never had this high of a share of immigrants in its population.
So I'm going to add a little bit more texture to this. I want you to say, Mike, you're getting that wrong, or you got this data point wrong. But I'm going to say all this for a reason, and then I want you to kind of tell me what this tells you about going forward. You said something really profound and really important that people should be paying attention to, and that is we're witnessing a decline in immigration now. Net migration numbers from Latin America broadly, Mexico specifically, I think, and it's the first time we've seen that in 50 years. And again, I know this is really nerdy, but that's going to have profound implications on voting behavior 18 years from now when there are fewer immigrant voters from Latin America and an explosion of the U.S.-born Latino voter, right? Is that fair to say?
That's right, yes.
And so do you see generational differences when we were at the previous peak around 2007, 2008? I think is the last high before the Great Recession, and then the collapse in the real estate market. A lot of folks in construction and related industries leave. And then you start to see the children of a lot of immigrants start to explode, where we're seeing a lot more now U.S.-born voters as opposed to foreign-born voters. And that perspective changes. Is that accurate to say?
That's a really good question. I think there's a lot of dynamics there to talk through. So, for example, today when you talk about Latino voters, maybe about 3/4 will be U.S. born, and of those, about half will be what we call the second generation or the U.S. born children of immigrant parents, and then another half will be the third or higher generation U.S. born U.S. born to U.S. born parents. But the immigrant share has typically been around 20 to 25% among Latino registered voters or actual voters, depending on the year. It is true that the share of the U.S. Latino population that is immigrant is in decline. And it's been in decline since 2000. In 2000, it hit the peak of 40%. Now it's maybe about 31% in the most recent data I've seen. Also, the share of adult Latinos who are immigrants used to be over 50%, like 55% was the peak back in 2000. Today, it's about 45%. So we're seeing a decline in the share of the population, even among adults who are immigrants. There still remain many Latino immigrants who are eligible to naturalize but haven't done so. And we're talking about people in we're talking about into the millions. So anywhere from 2 to 3, maybe 4 million people could become a U.S. citizen and therefore eligible to vote. So when you're talking about this pool of potential voters, it still remains overwhelmingly U.S. born. And there is still potential for, even today, some more immigrants to enter the potential voting pool. But there's no doubt that while immigration remains important for the Latino population, in the last few years, we did have a record increase in the number of Latino immigrants living in the country. It is also the case that now immigration is in decline, and a lot of people who are leaving the country, whether through deportation, voluntarily, are people who are returning to Latin America. Couple that with fewer people around the world deciding to come because the U.S. has become more difficult to enter, whether to enter without authorization or to do so legally. You know the story about H-1B visas and how much more expensive it is to do that. And refugee admissions are also now closed for a number of countries. Those are all examples of how it is becoming harder to bring people into the country. Let me say that I think that on the one hand, that could have implications for Latino voters. Yes, it's for the changes you talked about. That is that in 20 years, it's a much more U.S.-born voter pool. I think that was going to happen anyway, because I don't think we could have enough immigration to really change that story. But it's going to become a more U.S.-born story. But something you and I have talked about a lot is the role in the demographics of the population of the third generation. That is, those people who are Latinos who are U.S.-born with U.S.-born parents. So they're a little farther removed from the immigrant experience. Prior to the COVID pandemic, that group had just become the largest group among Latinos overall. It was like 34%. Second generation, the U.S.-born children of immigrant parents was maybe like 32, and then immigrants were the remainder. So you had these really, really close numbers. 22, 23, and 24 brought many new immigrants and shifted that again so that the third generation was not the largest. But I think when we go back, when you start to look at the future, you'll start to see that third generation will continue to rise. And in many ways, it might look like the 50s and 60s again in terms of the share of the Latino population that is third or higher generation. What does that mean for politics? I don't know. One other thing to add here is, we've talked about as well is interracial interethnic marriage. Latinos have one of the highest intermarriage rates. About 30% of newlyweds marry somebody who's not Latino. Among the U.S. born, it's 40% who do that. If it's a more U.S.-born population that's intermixing, what does that mean for Latino politics in the future is another interesting question.
That's an exciting question for a researcher like you too, right? Because you get to actually, you'll still be doing this and have to answer a lot of those questions. And you've seen this community change generationally, immigration levels, interracial marriage rates, all of these changes. To be able to, I'm as nerdy as you and all the other listeners. To me, that's just so exciting to be able to say to be the first person to look at the microscope, under the microscope, and say like all of these dramatic changes are happening, and they do have really profound effects on who we are as Americans, not just Latinos but non-Latinos. Like, what is the country becoming? What is our perspective of who we are? How are we changing? So I've loved your work, Mark, over the years. Well, maybe I'll have a couple more questions. I'm gonna try and say last question, but this last year, or at least 13 months now, November 2024, the world shakes with this massive rightward shift. 2025, massive shift back to the left. everyone's trying to figure out what does this all mean? I mean, your phone must be blowing up constantly from reporters saying, what does this mean? What is this telling us? So what I'm asking you is, what does this mean? What is this telling us?
I think one thing that I think is interesting, and earlier we were talking about the could it be that the Latino vote as an idea is perhaps not quite what it had been in the past? But I will say one thing that the last few years, the last two elections, have I think really indicated is that maybe we're in that period where Latino voters are quote unquote that important swing vote. I'm not quite sure I want to say swing vote, but that vote that people are focusing on now, trying to reach out to because they've seen the power of it in 24 and in 25. I'm wondering what will happen in 26. But for many years, we oftentimes were talking about as researchers how much candidates did not reach out to Latinos, how it seemed that you had to make the case for reaching out to Latinos, let alone the young Latinos or specific groups of Latinos that are Spanish speakers. But it's really interesting that now we're in a period where everybody is wanting to know about Latino voters. So I find there is more interest now than there had been, even though I might think that in the future, I'm not quite sure how distinct the vote will be, but there is a lot of interest in it. And that to me is really the interesting change here is the focus on Latino voters by many people who traditionally hadn't focused on Latino voters and sort of treated them as a single top line number on a survey questionnaire, as opposed to trying to understand the dynamics within it.
Brother, it's been like 25 years and we were hoping this day would come when everybody would pay attention to us. But like all things in human affairs, once they are, you're kind of like going, well, wait a second. It's not exactly the attention that we were hoping to have.
Yeah.
But what I will say is it has been a real honor and one of the great pleasures of my political and professional career to watch you be a guide through all of this demographic transformation as the United States becomes a non-white majority country. You'll still be doing it when that happens, and I think your body of work is literally those breadcrumbs, those Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs that people will be able to look back and follow when America went through this extraordinary, unique transformation in its ethnic and racial identity. So thank you for all of your work, Dr. Lopez. I'm not going to take up any more of your time, but thank you so much for visiting us. Thank you so much for your research, and please come back and visit us again.
Will do, Mike. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you for all the great questions. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Mark.